So why is this Tupperware jar all the rage right now? Well, apparently it's the easiest way to make pour-over coffee. We'll see about that. Today we're going to be talking about the Orea Z1. Orea is a company that became famous creating very fast-flowing flat-bottom drippers, and this is no different. It's their first foray into the world of no-bypass brewing. Now, if you don't know what that is, I'll talk about that in a second, but I want to start by talking about the launch campaign. They had a super creative campaign to launch this product where they sent out this mysterious large box to, I think, 15 short-form content creators around the world. And of course, they weren't given the code to open the box. They did eventually give out the codes. There was a dramatic unboxing and out came this. And people were certain with all the hype that this had to be glass, but no. It was this little plastic container. So to call it a damp squib would be an understatement, probably a very wet squib. But there was something that absolutely shocked a whole bunch of people: the price. But luckily, looks aren't everything. Performance is obviously way more important, and we've tested every aspect of this brewer to see if it actually brings something new to the table. And with respect to the price, there is a reason why it's so expensive. I'm going to try and break it down so you have all of the information to decide whether it's worth it for you or not. Let's get into it. Now, before we get started, the Z1 was sent to us by Orea. We do get to keep it, but no money exchange hands. They've had absolutely no say in what we put in this video, and they don't get to watch it before any of you do. As always, a massive thanks to Benki Brewing Tools for helping with all of the logistics. If you're looking for coffee gear, then use the link in the description below to get 5% off. It also helps the channel. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, when brewing with a brewer like the Z1 or the Pulsar or even Sophie, all of the brew water has to go through the coffee bed. If you're confused, then think about brewing with something like the V60. Here, because of the internal ridges, you have an air gap between the paper filter and the walls of the brewer, and some of the brew water can partially or completely bypass the bed of coffee and enter the carafe. That can't happen here, hence the name. Now, there are pros and cons to brewing this way, and we'll look at that in depth a little later on, along with taste differences in the cup. But for now, let's sidestep and look at aesthetics. To me, this just looks like a little plastic jar. And if you had to look at it in terms of a coffee person, then maybe an AeroPress XL that's been sawed off with a mellow drip on top. It isn't ugly per se, but the previous Oreas have been very pretty. Not so much this one. But the hope is that all of the effort has been put into the functionality of the dripper. But what it does have going for it is the theater when you're brewing coffee. I think it's one of the prettiest brewers to look at when it's brewing because you have this unobstructed view of coffee rain. And you don't get that with any other brewer. With something like the Pulsar, it looks like it's peeing out a stream of coffee. Same with the V60. Here, it's delightful. I'll give you a second to enjoy the coffee porn before I continue. So yeah, that, and I also like that it's small. In terms of build quality, there isn't much to say other than for a plastic product, it's built really well. Especially the main chamber has very thick walls. Now, before we get into the USP of the Z1 and what sets it apart from other no-bypass brewers on the market, let's talk about the biggest problem with no-bypass brewing, and that is clogging. There are a couple of reasons why this happens. One is, like I mentioned earlier, all of the brew water has to go through the bed of coffee. So that means less airflow and no opportunity for the water to bypass or travel around the bed of coffee. That slows down the drawdown anyway. The second thing is the paper filter itself. If you look at the surface area of the paper filter on a no-bypass brewer, it's just a disc. And that is substantially lower than having the large surface area on the inside of a cone like a V60 or a Chemex. And this makes a huge difference in terms of how many fines the paper can absorb and still have good flow rate. Okay, so keeping that in mind, let's dive into the design and functionality of the Z1. For starters, you have this filter section below that has multiple large holes, so this creates a lot of contact points with the paper filter. And the more contact points you have, the faster the flow rate. Now, this may sound counterintuitive, but very early on, I tried to brew with just the cone paper filter. I clipped it on two ends, thought I'm going to get the fastest brew ever. And it was quite a bit slower than when it was inside the V60. And this kind of blew my mind. But more recently, I watched the video that Lance made with Matt Winton, which explains this very clearly. I suggest you watch that if you're interested. But long story short, the more contact points you have with the paper, the faster the flow rate. And this has a lot of contact points. Secondly, you're using Sybaris, the freaking F1 car of paper filters. So the combination of these two things makes this by far the fastest no bypass brewer on the market. We even did a bunch of flow rate tests that I'll show you in the next segment of this video. We compared it to the AeroPress XL filters, the Pulsar, the Tricolet, and even Sophie. So stick around for that. The third thing that it has going for it is the fact that it uses the Mellow Drip. Now, in my opinion, this is one of the best shower screens that I've used. It has this honeycomb pattern on top which collects the water, and it does a phenomenal job of taking that kettle stream and distributing it into a perfectly even shower. So I'm glad that they've integrated something that already works really well into this design. The next one is that it's shorter, putting the shower screen closer to the bed of coffee, which means lower agitation and lower chances of clogging. And then there's the diameter. This is substantially narrower than the Tricolet or the Pulsar, which means you can dose lower. With the Pulsar or the Tricolet, I would say at least 25 grams of coffee. You could get away with 22, but anything below that and your puck is so thin that it's very prone to channeling. Here you can dose all the way down to 12 grams, but I would recommend at least 15 for good consistency, which is substantially better than having to use so much coffee in the Tricolet or the Pulsar because I'm someone who likes to brew smaller doses. The fact that it's more compact, the walls are much thicker, and the top is closed off with the Mellow Drip means that the overall chamber maintains a much higher temperature, which means a higher slurry temperature over the course of your brew. And lastly, yes, it is very easy to use. I wouldn't say it's substantially easier than other no bypass brewers. Basically, when you eliminate the variability of pouring, which has a humongous impact on the brew, we've done an entire video on it, you can go check that out. But the moment you eliminate that, it makes things significantly simpler. So yeah, that's 4 or 5 things that I just mentioned that really differentiate the Z1 from other no bypass brewers on the market. I'm not saying it's better, but I'm saying it's different enough to warrant its existence in the first place. And that's not something I can say for a lot of other drippers. Okay, enough with the praise. Let's get to the fun stuff. Things that piss me off. For starters, thread count. And no, this is not about some fancy Egyptian cotton sheets. We're talking about this. I have to make 7 full rotations to get this filter cap off. I don't know about you, but that seems a little excessive to me. It's especially delightful during cleanup. Now, another side effect of having so many threads is this immense protrusion at the bottom, which makes this brewer compatible with exactly 0 of the carafes that I own. So I'm forced to use this prototype, which doesn't have a handle, gets incredibly hot. I don't know if you know me, but I'm capable of breaking things on a good day. So transporting this contraption after brewing from my coffee bar to the sink without burning myself is, how do I put it lightly, a disaster waiting to happen. I mean, I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I see absolutely no functional benefit in having so many threads. Maybe 2 or even a lock system like the AeroPress, I think would work just fine, and it would sort out the carafe issue. I know this because our Sophie brewer is the exact same diameter, and because it protrudes less, it fits all of my carafes, except the Orea Z1, which has a narrower neck anyway. Okay, another minor annoyance is that the paper filters don't drop in satisfyingly like they do on an AeroPress or the Pulsar. You actually have to use your finger to poke and prod to get it to sit flat. Guess whose fault that is? The threads. Geez, these things are a bloody nuisance. Anyway, moving on. The other thing that annoys me is the fact that the Mellow Drip just sits on top here. Let me know if this bothers you too, but I find myself dropping the Mellow Drip all the time. I will pick this up and tilt it to look at the bottom or do something else, and I will just drop this. It's a bit annoying, probably a little nitpicky. My other issue is also to do with the Mellow Drip. For those of you who've used this, you know that it has quite a bit of retention. Once you're done pouring and it's dripped through, it still retains about 3 to 5 grams of water, and you need to give it a shake to get that all out. Now, most normal people wouldn't even think about this, but I have some issues, so I'm constantly obsessing about how much temperature that retained water is losing between pours. So I find myself finishing a pour and then giving it a shake and putting it back down. It is very frustrating that this bothers me, but this is much more likely a me problem than a brewer problem, so let's move on. And the last thing on my list of annoyances is also to do with the Mellow Drip. Ironic considering how much I just praised it, but stick with me. The fact that the Mellow Drip is smaller than the base means that the shower only hits the grounds in the middle, resulting in a concave bed at the end of most brews. Luckily, this isn't such a big deal because when we get to the workflow section of this video, I'll show you how to use this to your advantage and also brew in a way where you can get a perfectly flat bed of coffee. But now, let's look at the flow rate test. I'm going to save the best for last. Let's kick things off with the Z1, but with the AeroPress XL filters inside. As you can see here, it takes about 26 seconds. It's still not fully done, so I would say maybe 28 to 30 seconds. Next, we have the Pulsar, which took around 12 to 15 seconds, which is pretty quick. Then we have Sophie with the Sybaris filters inside, and it does very similarly to the Pulsar. Again, it shows you the power of contact points. Sophie has very tiny holes underneath, they're 0.8 mm roughly, but the fact that there's so many of them and they're making good contact with the paper means that you get pretty fast flow rate. The Trickler doesn't have as good airflow, and the paper is also thicker and slower, so this one took over 26 seconds. Again, almost 30 seconds. It was very close to the AeroPress XL filters in the Z1. And saving the best for last, the Z1 with the Sybaris filters took like 2 to 3 seconds, which is insane. I mean, it drained so quickly, it reminded me of my bank account. Also, these filters have an excellent ability to absorb a lot of fines without clogging, so it's safe to say that this is the fastest no bypass brewer that you can buy right now. But what exactly does that mean in practice? Let's brew some coffee. I'm going to use the Z1 the way that I like to. And once we're done, we can clean up and I'll break down what I did and also tell you other ways in which you can use this brewer. We're going to be brewing this delightful Kenyan coffee from Say. I'm going to be pushing this really hard. This may not work with all coffees, so I will talk about that, like I said, after I'm done brewing. But I've ground this very, very fine. We're going to be pushing this to a 1:20 ratio. You may think that that's going to taste watered down or tea-like, but I'll talk about taste once I'm done. So today we're going to be brewing 15 grams of coffee with 300 grams of water. I'm going to be pouring quite gently. I'll be doing a 3x bloom. And after that, I'm going to be super gentle. I'm going to do multiple pours. We'll see how many it takes. Keep the slurry about 1 centimeter or so above the bed. And then once it's almost drawn down completely, I'm going to do the next pour. Let me first assemble this. Yep, it's going to take 7 to 12 minutes to unscrew this. You can give this a rinse. There's no papery taste or anything of the sort, but if you did want to preheat it, then you can. All right, let me tear the scales, get the coffee in. I've also got these Ray-Ban Metas on, so I'm going to try and get some POV shots. We'll see how that goes. I'm trying to do way too many things. I'm the worst multitasker on the planet. So if this is absolute garbage, then I apologize. So I'm going to give this a bit of a shake. I want the bed nice and level. We can put the mellow drip back on. I'm using these nice duo scales from Timecodes, which allows me to use this lovely carafe from Icosa Brew. If I was brewing directly onto a carafe, then like I said, I have to use this thing. All right. This is terrible positioning. I can't really see the, okay, 45 right there. And then give this very minimal, then I let it sit. So I'm going to let this bloom for around 40 seconds, 45 seconds. And then we're just going to do multiple pours. Just get it up about 1 centimeter or 2 and then let it draw down. Okay, we're at around 40 seconds and I'm going to do my first pour. As you can see, it's very gentle. And there we are. Okay, another really interesting thing that you'll notice is the initial drawdown is super slow because the coffee that's been extracted is very viscous. It's the beginning of the extraction. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do my second pour because we're almost drawn down completely. And there we have the exact same amount. And you'll see that as the brew progresses, your drawdown becomes quicker and quicker and quicker. That's because much like espresso, the puck is losing soluble material and becoming more porous. And you can already see at this point that the water above the bed is almost clear, which means you're achieving very, very low agitation and extraction is only happening as the water percolates through the bed, which is exactly what we want because we want very high extraction and very high clarity. We're currently at 200 mils and we need to do another 100 ml of pours to finish out this brew. And you can already see how much faster it's drawing down now than it was in the beginning of this brew. I've turned off the kettle. I don't want to have it constantly reheat after the first few pours. So we're at 260. We're currently at 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Anywhere from 5 to 7, 8 minutes is fine. There we're at 290. So I'm just going to finish out this brew. So I have no clue how many pours we did. It was quite a few. And then now I'm just going to let this draw down. Oh man, this is so cool. Yeah, the visuals on this brewer are absolutely delightful. There we are, right at the 5-minute 15 mark. The brew is done. And if you actually look in here, which I'm going to do, okay, now that is a very flat bed of coffee. And that's one of the advantages of brewing like this with very low agitation and keeping a low slurry height. But now, let's give this a taste. First, I'm going to give it a nice swirl. Cheers. That's just nuts. There's absolutely no astringency, no bitterness. It's incredibly sweet. And you'd be shocked at the amount of body that this coffee has, considering we've pushed it all the way to 1:20. So this is how I like using the Z1. But now let me clean up, finish this cup of coffee in peace, and then we'll break down what I just did and also talk about other ways in which you can use the Z1. Okay, I'm back. Normal glasses. Now, usually there's a trade-off. If you're getting very high extraction with brewers like the V60, they're very prone to astringency and bitterness, so you need to be pretty careful. But here, because you have no bypass, you're able to lower the agitation and get very high extractions and very high clarity without any bitterness and astringency. So a few things to keep in mind when you're trying this at home. Firstly, make sure that you have high quality coffee that can handle being brewed like this. But hey, have fun with it. Push it to 1:20. If it doesn't taste good, then dial it back. Also, play around with your grind size. And another thing to keep in mind here is your grinder. Some grinders can't handle being pushed so hard, so you may need to dial back the ratio or the grind size. So if you keep all of these things in mind, then the foundation of the recipe remains the same. You're grinding finer than you would for a regular pour over, and you're being very gentle with your pours, and you're keeping the slurry height very low. So try that, see if it works for you. This is my favorite way to brew with the Z1 because the combination of the Sybaris filters and the multiple contact points allows me to do so many pours without having 30-minute brews, and you're able to get a flavor profile that's pretty unique. And like I showed you, you have a nice flat bed, even though the mellow drip has a smaller diameter than the base. Now, the other end of the spectrum is where you would grind much coarser, and then you'd have to do an extended bloom because you want full diffusion into the larger particles. You may even do 2 blooms, and then you're going to be pouring, so you have a much taller column of water above the bed of coffee. And in that case, you'll notice that after a couple of pours, you have a full drawdown, and then you have a concave bed. And here you're getting a little more of a stratified profile, which is closer to your, I would say, regular flat bottom brewers like the Orea V3. It obviously doesn't quite get as stratified as something like the V60, so you're not going to get that profile. But for me personally, I prefer the finer grind and multiple pours. And if I was going for a more stratified brew profile, then I would rather use a regular flat bottom brewer or go all the way to a V60. I would encourage you to try both styles and even somewhere in between and see where you land. It's a pretty versatile brewer, so play around with it and see what works for you. Now, some coffees may run through this brewer very, very quickly. There are a few Indian coffees that produce barely any fines. So in that case, I actually like to pop in the AeroPress XL filter, so I'm able to slow down the brew a little bit and get a slightly higher extraction. And before we move on, just a little bit of nerd talk about the flat bed and concave bed. Basically, the water above a puck of coffee applies a certain amount of pressure on it, and at any given point, there's more water flowing through the center of the puck than the sides because the sides are in contact with the walls and they experience friction. So it's moving slower. So if you have a taller column of water above the bed, then it's applying more pressure and this effect is more pronounced, hence the concave bed at the end of the brew. What we did was try to minimize this effect by doing multiple gentle pours and keeping them small. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, let's address the elephant in the room, the price. At $85, this is expensive. There's no denying that. So why is it so expensive? Basically, this is a collaboration between 3 separate companies, 3 brands. You have the top, which is made by Melodrip. You have this bottom section that is designed and made by Orea. And you have the filters that are made by Sybaris. 3 separate companies. And when you have a collaboration like this, I don't think you have much control over pricing, which is unfortunate because this actually brings something unique to the table. The Melodrip retails at around $30. The Sybaris filters go for, I think, $18 for a pack of 50. Expensive, but I think worth it for what they do. And so if you eliminate these 2, this becomes a more palatable, I think, $40. So yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22 because you have these 3 companies that have come together to create a single product that they've branded under the Orea name. So if you're someone who's interested in the Z1 and you're able to view it as 3 separate products for $85, then I think you'll be pretty happy with your purchase. But if you're someone who still thinks the price tag is obscene, then there are alternatives. You could get the Tricolate or the Pulsar, which I highly recommend because it has the variable aperture. You can do a lot of stuff with that. You could even get Sophie, which is a brewer that we make. Shameless plug. Let's wrap this one up with a quick summary. I think the Z1 is a worthy addition to the Orea lineup. It stays in line with their philosophy to create very fast-flowing drippers. In the world of no-bypass brewing, I think it's different enough to warrant its existence. Unfortunately, we have this price issue which is going to turn a bunch of people away. But now, I would love to hear from all of you. Do any of you own the Z1? Are you happy with it, and do you think the price is justified? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and brew ARAMSE.